afternoon. I'm proud to call to order this first subcommittee hearing of the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration, Citizenship, and Border Safety. My name is Alex Padilla, honored to serve as chair of this subcommittee. And I thank those of you who are tuning in or joining us today. Today is not just the first hearing of this subcommittee in this Congress. It is also my first time serving as chair of this subcommittee. I want to begin by thanking all the witnesses who are participating today and the members of the committee who are joining us both in person and virtually. And I'd particularly like to thank Chairman Durbin and the committee staff for their support and guidance in helping us hold this hearing. I also want to thank Senator Cornyn, ranking member, and his team. Thank you, Senator Booker. Not distracting at all. For their cooperation
Uber Eats.
Organizing today. That's a side hustle. Thank you. Now, before I begin my opening remarks, I would like to share a video highlighting the importance of essential workers.
Immigrants make up about 20% of essential workers.
The implication of being essential is that we actually do need them.
These workers have proven they're essential and should be given a pathway to citizenship to truly realize their American dream.
Undocumented essential workers have risked their health to put food on our tables and supplies in our stores.
There has been a national outpouring of well-deserved support, admiration, and gratitude for our brave medical professionals who risk their lives every day to save lives in this pandemic. We give them a special thanks tonight.
We cannot allow the American dream to be a casualty of this pandemic. So it's a profound personal honor for me to convene this hearing here in the United States Senate on the essential role of immigrant workers in America. I am the proud son of two immigrant workers, and I know firsthand the value that immigrants bring to this country. Like so many others, my mother and father came to the United States to make a better life. They arrived in California from different parts of Mexico in the 1960s. They, like so many others, came with the belief in the promise of the American dream, that no matter where you are from, if you work hard, you can contribute to your community and build a better future for your children. My parents worked tirelessly for 40 years to realize that dream. My father as a short order cook and my mom as a housekeeper. When they first met, they fell in love and they decided to apply for green cards in that order. Eventually they became American citizens, and along the way they had and raised 3 children to believe in the value of hard work, getting a good education, and service to others. I sit here today as the embodiment of their American dream, the son of immigrants from Mexico, now serving in the United States Senate, presiding over a hearing to discuss immigration. So yes, immigration is personal to me and important to my state. In fact, Senator Cornyn, no states have more at stake in immigration policy than California and Texas. Together, our states are home to more than a third of the country's foreign-born population. Now, I know I sit here because of my parents' many years of hard, essential work, but also because of their good fortune. However, too many immigrants across the country with the same values and drive to succeed as my parents are left to struggle against the arbitrary and unfair rules of our immigration system. Too many immigrants lack basic workplace protections because of their immigration status. Too many families are denied critical aid. And yet America depends on the labor of immigrants. Immigrants are critical to our strength in every essential industry, from agriculture and education to healthcare, domestic work, construction, food processing, technology, and many more. During the COVID-19 pandemic, nearly 1 in 5 jobs deemed essential by the United States government was held by an immigrant. Almost 3/4 of undocumented immigrants work in an essential industry. Day in and day out, immigrants have put their own health and their families' health on the line to keep America running. Immigrants disproportionately work in the kinds of jobs that cannot be done by Zoom or WebEx or any platform. Now, during the course of the pandemic, when hundreds of thousands of people were in the process of dying in our country, these immigrant essential workers risked their own lives and the lives of their families to ensure that Americans still had food on the tables, that our children and elderly were cared for, that our healthcare centers and other facilities were cleaned and sanitized. They have more than earned the security and protection in this country for which they have sacrificed so much. Let us take a moment to reflect on the fact that the United States government deems these immigrants essential to keeping our country running and keeping Americans alive. Yet that same government denies them any permanent protections. The first bill I've introduced as a United States Senator was the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act. It would create a pathway to citizenship for the over 5 million essential workers without permanent legal status who have kept Americans healthy, fed, and safe during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I thank so many of my colleagues for co-sponsoring the bill so far, including Leader Schumer, Chairman Durbin, and Senators Warren, Sanders, Blumenthal, Booker, Gillibrand, Hickenlooper, Markey, Van Hollen, Whitehouse, Baldwin, and Coons. The immigrant workers who have sacrificed and served for us through the pandemic have earned more than platitudes. They have earned citizenship. Strengthening legal protections for immigrants and creating new paths to citizenship will also grow our economy and improve workplaces for all. Now, I know that some of my colleagues may claim that we can't take action on immigration reforms that have broad bipartisan support because of the growing number of asylum seekers arriving at our southern border. While there's clearly more work to be done, the fact is the Biden-Harris administration has already made significant progress at establishing a well-managed and secure border while also treating people more fairly and more humanely, despite what the Trump administration left behind. Indeed, the number of children in customs and border protection facilities has dropped 85% since late March. And the amount of time children spend in these facilities has fallen by about 77% over the same time frame. So I don't want us to misrepresent the asylum process at the border as the entirety of our immigration system. How we address the status of those who are already here is an entirely separate issue. We can't keep the people who've been working on the front lines, who are part of our communities, who've been here for decades, waiting for the shot at the American dream that they have earned. It's time to reform our immigration system to promote justice, protect dignity, and better reflect the needs of our country. Now I'll turn to Ranking Member Cornyn for his opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Chairman Padilla. It's a pleasure to work with you. Congratulations for your chairmanship. As you and I have discussed, I look forward to working with you as we've tried to work together on a bipartisan basis to come up with common sense policies that secure our border and improve our immigration system. To me, it's pretty straightforward. That is, we are the beneficiary of a legal immigration system that allows us to naturalize almost 1 million people a year. And to me, that's one of our country's great strengths. On the other hand, I believe illegal immigration is something that we need to combat and deter and encourage people to do it the way that legal immigrants do, which is to apply to come to this country through our legal immigration system. You're exactly right when you talk about the importance of immigrant workers to our economy. There's no question about it. Everything from agriculture to manufacturing to research and technology, immigrant workers play a critical role in our economy and in our country. When it comes to healthcare workers in particular, there is a need for us to take action. As you point out, doctors, nurses, healthcare providers across the country have contributed to the battle against COVID-19 for well over a year now. Hospitals and healthcare providers in hotspots and rural areas alike have struggled to find the workforce to sustain the fight. I recently joined Senator Durbin in reintroducing the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act in order to grant green cards to foreign doctors and nurses our healthcare system needs and relies on when we can't grow enough of that talent here domestically. I also am co-sponsoring Senator Rubio's American Citizen Coronavirus Relief Act to ensure U.S. citizens in mixed status marriages would not be barred from receiving coronavirus assistance. These bills, I think, are common sense answers to real problems, and they'll help families across the country receive the health care they need. I'm one of those who perhaps you were thinking of when you said that we need to put out the fire on the border in the current crisis before I believe the political support is there to move forward on some of these necessary immigration reforms that Senator Durbin and I have been talking about since I got here, since we both got here. He got here before I did. But I can't imagine that the American people will allow us or agree that we need to move on to some of these other issues before we address the current crisis at the border. Just to refresh all of our memories, 749,000 people have been detained at the border this fiscal year alone. Many of them, because of the COVID-19, have been returned back to their country of origin across the border into Mexico because of the public health crisis. But many have made their way into the United States, and particularly unaccompanied children. You mentioned the asylum problem. It is severe, and that, frankly, is one of the reasons why the human smugglers who charge, as you know, by several thousands of dollars per head, continue to bring children, including unaccompanied children, into the United States because they realize they've been able to flood the zone and to overwhelm our capacity to process these asylum cases. Senator Sinema, the senator from Arizona, and I have made a modest proposal to try to ameliorate some of that. We've briefed Senator Durbin about that. But I believe until we address some of these pull factors, which encourage people to come to our country knowing that they, in all likelihood, will not be able to qualify under the legal standard for asylum, that I think we will not have done our job. So I am anxious to try to find a solution. I know this is one of my biggest frustrations since the time I've been in the Senate, our inability to deal with things like our national debt and to deal with our flawed immigration system. There's a lot we can and should do. I am concerned with the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act, that it puts basically the cart ahead of the horse. It aims to naturalize a large percentage of the undocumented population with only a tenuous nexus to the pandemic. The legal status of those who would receive lawful permanent residence under this legislation is not in jeopardy because of the pandemic. The vast majority are simply unlawfully present in the United States. In addition, the proposal does not enhance border security or interior enforcement, things like E-Verify, making sure that we figure out how to keep the drugs and the human traffickers out of our country, along with people who are economic migrants. In fact, unfortunately, I think the proposal would actually weaken enforcement by eliminating disincentives to overstay visas and by watering down the grounds on which the United States can exclude criminal aliens. Rather than permanently bringing people out of the shadows, this bill would, I fear, only allow the number of undocumented migrants to grow. Adding to the long list of issues where perhaps you and I do not see eye to eye on this, it's also fundamentally unfair to all of the migrants who have been caught in the long visa backlogs, including the people who fundamentally have been trying to do it the right way. It's unfair to let others jump ahead of them in line. The Citizenship for Essential Workers Act would grant immediate lawful permanent resident status to people who've overstayed their visas, in other words, who've violated our laws or entered the United States unlawfully, while those who followed the rules and did everything we've asked them to do would have to continue to wait. Past efforts have cleared out the backlogs before granting green cards to those who did not follow our immigration laws. This proposal abandons that practice. It also would purport to aid in our economic recovery, but unlike past comprehensive immigration reforms, it does nothing to guarantee an adequate supply of permanent employment-based immigrants and guest workers to fill the actual labor needs of American businesses. In that connection, I have a letter here from the American Farm Bureau Federation that speaks to that last point, and I'd ask unanimous consent this be made part of the record following my remarks.
Without objection.
Finally, I'm concerned this legislation does not take necessary steps to address potential fraud. In the 80s, hundreds of thousands of migrants fraudulently applied for status under the Special Agriculture Workers provisions of the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, colloquially known as the Reagan Amnesty. Then Congressman Chuck Schumer said, in developing immigration policies in the future, Congress will be much more wary of the potential for fraud and will do more to stop it. I worry that we could be poised to repeat the mistakes we made back in 1986, or those who came before us made in 1986, which goes so far as to clarify that it would not require applicants to appear before the Department of Homeland Security for in-person interviews in connection with their application. Mr. Chairman, yesterday's CBP released the April 2021 figures for apprehensions and expulsions along the southwest border. At the end of April, President Biden insisted that the numbers were, quote, way down now, and that we've now gotten it under control. But as I said earlier, 750,000 migrants have been encountered at our southwestern border just since the beginning of this fiscal year. So these numbers tell a different story than you're hearing from President Biden. Total apprehensions and expulsions, again, grew over last month, and we continue to experience historic highs. And in all likelihood, it will continue to get nothing but worse because the same push factors and pull factors are at play until Congress takes a meaningful and serious step to try to address them. And I'm certainly, I think like all of us, sympathetic to those fleeing persecution in their countries of origin and believe we should offer them protection. That's what Senator Sinema's and my bill, along with bipartisan support in the House, attempts to do. But we also know that by the numbers that the vast majority of asylum claims simply don't hold up. It's about a 10% rate where they are ultimately validated, which is why many people who are released with a notice to appear for a future court hearing simply never show up and then have a default order of deportation entered by the immigration court. Many of the migrants who arrive at our borders, including unaccompanied children, are the victims of false promises by criminal organizations that exploit them. We need to do more to deter this dangerous journey from around the world and ensure that the Department of Homeland Security and Health and Human Services have adequate resources in place to respond and protect unaccompanied children. For example, right now, once a child is placed with a sponsor in the United States, there is virtually zero follow-up. And so nobody knows with any assurance that those children are not being exploited, sexually abused, trafficked, or forced into labor, as the Permanent Committee on Investigations determined under, I know Senator Portman, I think it was in Senator Peters just last year. So we're facing a crisis at our southern border right now, and it's like, I don't want to be painting the house while the house is on fire, but I will try to reassure you that I'm committed to try to work across the aisle, joining in the meetings that Senator Durbin has convened, and I'll continue to do that and try to come up with solutions and not just criticism or complaints. That's why I introduced the Bipartisan Border Solutions Act again with Senator Sinema and Congressman Cuellar, Congressman Tony Gonzalez in the House. So thank you for convening the hearing, and I look forward to hearing from the witnesses.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. Turn now to Judiciary Committee Chairman, Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Chairman Padilla. Many years ago, when I was a brand new member of the United States Senate and a brand new member of this committee, I got an amazing phone call. It was from a senator named Ted Kennedy. I couldn't believe Ted Kennedy was actually calling me. And he said, "You're coming on to the Judiciary Committee, and I want you on the Immigration Subcommittee." I said, "If you want it, Senator Kennedy, I'm going to do it." And I asked for it, and I was fortunate enough to become a member of that committee and a member of this subcommittee, which, with the exception of 2 years, I've served on now for 22 years, 24 years that I've been in the Senate. But I have to be here today, not just because of the importance of the topic that is at hand, but because I'm watching history in the making. Alex Padilla, you become the first Latino senator in the history of the United States Senate to chair the Immigration Subcommittee hearing. That is no small thing. It is the right thing. And I'm glad that you are here, not just for the people of California, but for our nation. You can speak, as you already have, to the reality of immigration, what you and your family have lived through, what they've worked so hard to prove themselves over the years, and how important their sacrifice has been to you and your family and your life. To represent both you and Senator Feinstein, this amazing state of California, is no small thing. It is a dramatic example of the trust that people in California have in you, and I'm glad you're here for this purpose. This moment is long overdue. And let me just say about essential workers, the people we are talking about today were not named essential workers by any politicians on the Democratic side. They were designated essential workers by the President Trump. It was the president who decided through his administration that their jobs were essential to America. And it's so obvious when you consider all of the different occupations that have been described in the earlier documentary. On the healthcare front, for goodness sakes, you have a nurse practitioner, Rosemary Tilus, I believe, who is going to be testifying today. I looked quickly at her remarks, and she talked about risking her life every day in front of COVID-19 as a healthcare provider. She said there was no second guessing or fear when it came to providing care to patients. As a healthcare provider, I knew it was my obligation to provide healthcare to those in need. That's an amazing statement. We cheer these people, these emergency healthcare workers, because of their courage and sacrifice to help us through this pandemic crisis. But listen to what she says in just the next sentence or two. Despite all of that, I live in constant fear of deportation or a discontinuation of my temporary protected status. So I would say to Senator Cornyn that there are so many different circumstances that brought people to this country. We know the vast majority of undocumented people overstayed a visa, came here on a student visa, travel visa, stayed on. It wasn't any sinister criminal plot. They were trying their best to become part of a country that they believed in. I would just say, Senator Cornyn, I'm glad that you and I are working together on this, and I just hope that we can, all the people who have faith in what we're doing, we can reward it with a good conclusion. I'm not going to give a sermon. I'm not qualified. My resume doesn't qualify me for it. But I will say this. I personally believe in a God of second chances. In fact, I'm counting on it. And these people today, these essential workers, are asking for a second chance. They may have come to this country in undocumented status, illegal circumstances, semi-legal circumstances, but they have tried to prove that they can earn their way to a legal status and really walk away from this fear of deportation. What more can we ask of them than to risk their lives for us? How can we turn them away? Will there ever be a day when they have paid their debt to this society and deserve a chance to become legal parts of America? I think that's what Senator Padilla's bill is all about, and that's why I'm proud to sponsor it and glad to be at this hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now I'd like to lay out the mechanics for the rest of today's hearing. After I introduce and swear in the witnesses, they will each have 5 minutes to make their opening remarks. We will then begin our first round of questions, and each senator will have 5 minutes. I ask that you please try to remain within your allotted time. And I believe Senator Whitehouse is joining us virtually to introduce our first witness. Senator Whitehouse, are you with us?
I am, Chairman, and I am here, and I am grateful to you for holding this hearing. In addition to what Chairman Durbin said about the historic nature of this, you may be setting the record for the shortest interval of time between being sworn into the Senate and chairing a hearing. So congratulations to you, Alex. I appreciate it. This hearing reflects that the United States is a nation of immigrants whose stories of success help build our country into the beacon of hope it is around the world. And particularly over the last year, we've seen immigrant workers, 5 million essential workers without permanent legal status, keep Americans healthy, fed, and safe during the COVID pandemic. Most of them have been in the country for more than a decade. And Rhode Islander Rose Tilus is one of them. And I'm very pleased to welcome a fellow Rhode Islander to the Judiciary Committee today. When Rose was just 17, she fled gang violence, political instability, and food insecurity in Haiti to come to the U.S. She was granted temporary protected status and seized the opportunities of America to go to college and eventually earn a master's degree in nursing. And as a nurse, she has worked tirelessly for her fellow Rhode Islanders in nursing homes, hospitals, and community health centers. When the COVID pandemic hit, Rose was on the front lines. Soon enough, she actually caught the virus herself, and so did her aunt, who lives with her, and who was hospitalized for a week as a result of her infection. Even so, Rose returned to work as soon as she could, continuing to help her fellow Rhode Islanders. She's lived here, as I said, for more than 20 years, yet she could still be forced to return to Haiti in spite of all her contributions to her Rhode Island community. I don't think there's a person on this committee who would want that to happen. And it's our responsibility to make sure that things like that don't happen. And Senator Padilla's Citizenship for Essential Workers Act would solve the problem that keeps Rose up at night. It would provide a path to citizenship for nurses like her and other essential workers who didn't have permanent legal status. So I am proud to support that important bill. Millions of essential workers, just like Rose, cared for us during the pandemic. Our country now owes them to ensure that they stay. Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Rose. Welcome to Washington, at least virtually.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. I'll now proceed with the rest of the witness introductions. We'll also be joined today by Bruce Goldstein, who is the president of Farm Worker Justice in Washington, D.C. He joined Farm Worker Justice as a staff attorney in 1988 and has been working ever since to empower farm workers to improve their wages, working conditions, occupational safety, health, immigration policy, and access to justice. We also welcome Dr. Tom Wong, who's an associate professor of political science and founding director of the U.S. Immigration Policy Center at the University of California, San Diego. His research focuses on the politics of immigration, citizenship, and migrant status. Dr. Wong's research has been cited by policymakers both in the United States and in Mexico, by organizations that serve immigrant communities, and in several federal lawsuits. We welcome Ron Vitiello, who recently completed 34 years of government service in the U.S. Border Patrol, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. From 2018 through April 2019, Mr. Vitiello served as Acting Director of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, where he oversaw a workforce of more than 20,000 officers, special agents, attorneys, and mission support professionals with a budget of over $7 billion. Prior to that, he served as Acting Deputy Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection and as Chief of the U.S. Border Patrol. Mr. Vitiello began his government career with the U.S. Border Patrol in Laredo, Texas in 1985. He's currently the head of DHS Programs and Strategy with Axon. And finally, we welcome Douglas Holtz-Eakin, President of the American Action Forum. Prior to founding the American Action Forum in 2009, he served as Chief Economist of the President's Council of Economic Advisors from 2001 to 2002, was the director of the Congressional Budget Office from 2003 to 2005, and was the director of Domestic and Economic Policy for the John McCain presidential campaign in 2007 and 2008. He was also a trustee professor of economics at the Maxwell School, chairman of the Department of Economics, and associate director of the Center for Policy Research at Syracuse University from 1990 through 2001. So with that, I would ask that all the witnesses please stand to be sworn in, and I'll administer the oath. Please stand and raise your right hand. Do you affirm that the testimony you are about to give before the committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Yes, I do.
Thank you. For the record, we heard an I do from all 5 witnesses. So thank you again to all the witnesses. Welcome. We'll begin with Ms. Tilus. Ms. Tilus, you may now proceed with your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Senator. Thank you, Senator Whitehouse, for the introduction. Thank you for all the members of the Senate. My name is Tilus, as you have already mentioned. I am a temporary protective status recipient from Haiti. I have been advocating on behalf of my fellow TPS holders and essential workers with the Haitian Bridge Alliance for over 2 years. For the past year, I have been one of the nurses fighting on the front line to provide care to individuals impacted by COVID-19. I am also one of the 346,000 healthcare workers that are undocumented in the United States and one of the 130,000 estimated TPS holders who are providing essential services to our nation during this pandemic. The coronavirus pandemic has brought us unprecedented trials and challenges for all of us. I have witnessed firsthand the loss and pain that it has brought on our patients and their families. However, my life's journey has given me the strength and resilience to offer hope to my patients during their times of great despair. My journey began in Haiti. Growing up in Haiti, a country known for its political instability and insecurity, I lived in fear. The current political turmoil has worsened steadily over time, and that includes gang violence, kidnapping, and countless deaths. 20 years ago, as a teenager, when I was 17, I arrived to the United States after my parents sent me to live with extended family. For the first time, I was alone without my close family. It was a very difficult transition for me to learn a new language, new culture, and tradition. In January 2010, a massive earthquake occurred in Haiti, killing 220,000, injuring more than 300,000, destroying homes, and leaving my country in ruins. Haiti was designated for temporary protective status following the earthquake. For Haitian nationals like myself, that was both a relief and a blessing. After 10 years of living in the United States with uncertainty, I was able to obtain a work permit which allowed me to attend school. I used that opportunity to earn a degree in nursing. I have worked in several settings such as nursing homes, hospitals, and community health centers. During this pandemic, I have been on the front line both as a registered nurse and later on as a nurse practitioner. Other TPS holders like myself have joined in the fight against the COVID-19. It has been a difficult year fighting against the COVID virus. I have witnessed patients dying when we were helpless and limited in our ability to save them. It was a very dangerous work environment. I contracted COVID with my household, and thankfully, we have recovered. Willing and proudly, I have worked alongside other team members to fight the pandemic in our city. There was no second guessing or fear when it came to providing care to patients. As a healthcare professional, I knew it was my obligation to provide care to those in need. In these difficult times, immigrants have shown their support and their devotion to this country. We have stood as frontline workers knowing that there was a possibility of death. The undocumented population has played a vital role in the fight against the COVID pandemic, whether it was in the food chain, cleaning, staffing, or in healthcare settings. I have called this country my home for the past 20 years. It's the place where I received my education, where I have worked to save lives, and where I have built a community. Rhode Island is the place I have learned to love, where I have built long-lasting relationships. This country means a lot to me. It has given me the opportunity to be successful as a productive member of society. The U.S. has given me a life that I could have only dreamt of in Haiti. Despite all that, I live in constant fear of deportation and discontinuation of my temporary protective status. Having TPS has given me a life that I am thankful for. However, TPS does not grant me permanent protection that I need to remain with my loved ones, my patients, and my community. As a valuable member of the community, a frontline worker, and a taxpayer, I ask Congress to pass the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act and use every available legislative tool to create a pathway to citizenship for frontline workers. We have proven our loyalty, our love, and devotion to the United States. We continue to show up when America needs us the most. As we continue to deal with the challenges of COVID-19, our work will continue to remain essential in rebuilding and strengthening our communities. Now we ask for Congress to recognize its contributions and give us the opportunity to be recognized as full members of the American family. Thank you so much for allowing me to have this testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Tilus. I now recognize Mr. Goldstein. Mr. Goldstein, your testimony, please.
Chairman Padilla, Ranking Member Cornyn, Chairman Durbin, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the contributions of immigrant essential workers. Throughout the pandemic, farm workers have performed essential work in the critical infrastructure sector of agriculture and food. Yet government policies on labor and immigration contribute to farm workers' low wages and dangerous working conditions. Undocumented farm workers are especially vulnerable. There is an urgent need for Congress to pass legislation that grants them and their families a pathway to immigration status and citizenship. An estimated 2.4 million farm workers labor on the nation's farms and ranches. The vast majority are immigrants, and at least one half are undocumented. Nearly 30% are women, and an estimated 4 out of 5 are Latino. Most have been living and working in the United States for more than 15 years. They are vital members of our communities. Farm workers help America's farms contribute $136 billion to the U.S. economy. Farm workers feed us. I think we all remember the widespread fear of food shortages last year as grocery shelves went bare. People who had never struggled to purchase food suddenly feared that they wouldn't be able to feed their families. In response, the government designated farm workers as essential workers. As other businesses shut down or shifted to telework, farm workers were told to keep going to work in person. Why? Because strawberries cannot be harvested and cows cannot be milked on Zoom. In California, farm workers showed up to work the state's vast farms. Farm workers showed up to the cotton fields and cattle ranches in Texas, dairies in Minnesota, peach orchards in South Carolina, sweet potato farms in North Carolina, and tobacco fields in Tennessee. And what happened? Our food supply stabilized, but COVID-19 wreaked havoc on farm workers and their families. An estimated 577,000 agricultural workers have contracted COVID-19. One study found that food and agriculture workers suffered the highest excess mortality rate of any occupation in California. And many who survived the disease now face long-term health problems as a result. Despite their essential work, farm workers are excluded from many labor laws protecting workers in other industries. Too many employers chose not to provide farm workers with CDC-recommended protections, including physical distancing in the fields and during transportation. Many farm workers lacked face masks, adequate sanitary facilities, access to testing, paid leave, health insurance, and accurate information in a language they understand. Low wages force many farm workers into crowded housing with shared sanitation facilities. And low incomes prevent many farm workers from taking time off from work for COVID testing, doctor's visits, or vaccinations. The broken immigration system intensified the pandemic's harms for undocumented workers and their families. Undocumented immigrants are ineligible for most of the public benefits created to confront the pandemic. They often work in fear that they will be fired in retaliation for requesting safety precautions. Many undocumented farm workers are reluctant to get tested, fearing that a positive result could cost them their job, or that immigration enforcement agents might arrest them at a testing or vaccination site and separate them from their children. My written testimony shares with you the story of Maria. She is a California farm worker who harvests fruits and vegetables and grafts almond trees. Maria continued working even when her employer failed to provide masks or other protective equipment because, as she said, we have children to support just like everyone else. She and her husband tested positive for COVID-19. Maria had serious symptoms that made it impossible to continue in her job, which required lifting 45-pound buckets of tomatoes. Without work, the family wondered how they would continue feeding their children. Unfortunately, Maria's story is not unique. In conclusion, the pandemic confirmed that immigrant farm workers, many of them undocumented, are essential to our food system and our nation's stability. They have labored through the pandemic to feed us, and many have suffered greatly. In return, they deserve a greater measure of justice from our government through more effective responses to the pandemic, ending discriminatory labor laws, and reforming the immigration system to grant undocumented farm workers and their family members an opportunity to obtain immigration status and citizenship. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. I now recognize Dr. Wong for your testimony. Dr. Wong.
Thank you, Chairman Padilla, Ranking Member Cornyn, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify before you today on the essential role that immigrant workers play in the American economy. My name is Tom Wong, and I'm an associate professor of political science at UC San Diego. I'm also founding director of the U.S. Immigration Policy Center and a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. There are approximately 5 million immigrant essential workers in the U.S. who currently lack permanent legal status. Throughout the pandemic, these workers have kept us and our loved ones healthy by working as healthcare practitioners and in healthcare support occupations. They've also kept us fed by working in our nation's food supply chain. To be clear, workers who we deem essential today should not live with the fear and uncertainty of being deported tomorrow. But with each day that goes by without meaningful immigration reform, the fear of deportation sits as an added burden on the shoulders of millions of immigrant essential workers and their families. Indeed, immigrant essential workers who lack permanent legal status have earned a pathway to citizenship. Moreover, a pathway to citizenship for these workers is crucial not only for keeping families together, but also for an inclusive and robust post-pandemic economic recovery. Of the estimated 5 million immigrant essential workers who lack permanent legal status, nearly 1 million live and work in California, and just under 850,000 live and work in Texas. Over 500,000 are deferred action for childhood arrivals or DACA recipients, or have temporary protected status, or TPS. When it comes to healthcare, there are an estimated 236,300 healthcare practitioners and those who work in healthcare support occupations who are immigrants who lack permanent legal status. An additional 109,900 keep medical and healthcare facilities operating by working as medical and health services managers, receptionists, housekeepers, janitors, and cooks. Whether as registered nurses or as janitorial workers in medical buildings, these essential workers, as Nurse Tilus makes so vivid, have helped keep Americans healthy throughout the pandemic despite the great risks to themselves. An estimated 1.7 million undocumented essential workers work in the U.S. food supply chain. An estimated 296,300 of these workers are in farming and agriculture, and an estimated 205,800 work in food production. But these estimates likely underestimate the contributions that immigrant farm workers make, as Mr. Goldstein's testimony makes clear. Indeed, these essential workers have helped keep Americans fed throughout the pandemic despite high-profile COVID outbreaks in food processing plants that have disproportionately impacted Hispanic and Latinx workers. In addition to the work that they do, immigrant essential workers contribute billions of dollars annually in federal, state, and local taxes. My colleagues at the Center for American Progress estimate that undocumented essential workers and their households pay an estimated $47.6 billion in federal taxes and $25.5 billion in state and local taxes annually. The data also shows that these workers have deep roots in American society. They've lived in the U.S. on average for 18 years. And they're more than just workers. They're also parents, spouses, neighbors, and members of our communities. An estimated 5 to 7 million U.S. citizens, including as many as 4 million U.S. citizen children, have a parent or a spouse who is an undocumented essential worker. Undocumented essential workers already make significant contributions to the American economy. However, the contributions can become much greater if they are given a pathway to citizenship. For example, wages increased by an estimated 6% among workers who obtained permanent legal status following the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, commonly known as IRCA. More recently, research has shown that average hourly wages among DACA recipients have more than doubled because of DACA. Now, increased wages not only translate into increased tax contributions, but will also add to the estimated $195.2 billion in annual spending power among undocumented essential workers, which will further contribute to a robust post-pandemic economic recovery. Other economists who have looked at the impact of providing a pathway to citizenship have found significant increases to overall GDP, increased wages for all Americans, not just those who benefit from legalization, and the creation of new jobs. Approximately 5 million immigrant essential workers currently lack permanent legal status. These workers contribute significantly to the American economy, have deep roots in American society, and are poised to play an important role in our post-pandemic economic recovery. Providing these essential workers with a pathway to citizenship will allow them to realize their full potential, to realize their American dreams. This is not only part of a just, inclusive, and robust post-pandemic economic recovery for all Americans, but this can also be done without increasing undocumented immigration to the U.S. to address specific concerns raised by Ranking Member Cornyn. So immigrant essential workers who lack permanent legal status deserve more than our recognition and our praise. They have earned a pathway to citizenship. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. Next, we turn to Mr. Vitiello.
Thank you. Chairman Durbin, Chairman Padilla, Ranking Member Cornyn, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony of my experience, past and present, regarding humanitarian and border security crises on our nation's southwest border. I started my career in the U.S. Border Patrol in 1985. I've worked in border communities in Texas, Arizona, and Vermont. In the headquarters, I was deputy and chief at Border Patrol and acted as the deputy commissioner, then was nearly confirmed as the ICE director during a 9-month period before my retirement in 2019. I currently work for Axon, a company that supports law enforcement in our communities by providing body-worn cameras, tasers, virtual reality training systems, and drones, and the supporting software that protects life and truth. In Border Patrol, my last field assignment was in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, where I was the chief patrol agent. I've implemented or operationalized every change to the Immigration and Nationality Act since 1986. I've rescued and attempted to revive those who suffered at the hands of unscrupulous smugglers. I've watched my colleagues risk their own well-being to save lives of those who smugglers have abandoned. I was assistant chief in headquarters in 2002, just after 9/11, and helped shape the newly created DHS and CBP headquarters under the direction of Secretary Ridge. In my experience prior to 9/11, most Americans were unaware of border issues and border security. Border communities and law enforcement see firsthand the challenges posed by drug and alien smugglers. Deaths of migrants are common and a great burden on our border towns. Post 9/11, we attempted to fully respond to the threats exposed by porous borders and lax immigration enforcement. We began to plan and think differently about borders and tried to meet the demand the public had for more effectiveness. Experience shows us that surges in illegal entries are slowed when consequences are applied. For example, in 2005, in the initial days of Secretary Chertoff's tenure, we were being overwhelmed at the southwest border with large numbers of groups from Brazil. Other non-Mexican adult migrants were also trending upward. Most of these migrants were processed for proceedings and released. When Secretary Chertoff asked CBP and ICE how to reduce the flow, the agency requested and were given the following. CBP expanded the use of expedited removal. ICE expanded and economized their detention facilities, allowing aliens to be in custody until their cases were heard. We also secured a diplomatic agreement with Mexico. Mexico removed Brazil from their visa-free travel list. Each of these inputs reduced the flow. The takeaway was consequences and incentives matter. If we could hold aliens for their hearing, fewer would make the journey. In 2014, during my service with the Obama administration, the number of unaccompanied alien minors increased 200%. The system, facilities, and placement for UAC and families were overwhelmed. The reasons for the increase, although unclear at the time, seem to have been multifaceted. Most of the illegals claimed to be coming to the USA for a better life. There was also purposeful confusion provided by smugglers that tied the announcement for DACA to permisos at the border. DHS did not have facilities to detain families, so after encounter and processing, the families were released. The cycle was repeated day after day throughout the year. Lack of consequences to those who cross illegally has and will continue to exacerbate this problem. It encourages more families to take this dangerous journey. In response to a migrant family and UAC's increase in 2014, Secretary Johnson authorized ICE to establish family residential centers supported by the immigration courts, which led to a sharp decline of families and children coming to the border in FY14 and 15. When the border is chaotic, agents are distracted caring for families. This places us all in danger. The criminal cartels that effectively control Mexico's northern border and the flows are being enriched by the lawlessness and unprecedented traffic we are seeing at the border. How do we fix it? In my years of service, many people have asked and suggested ways to control the border. What I have learned is not one thing can fix these problems. Simply, the incentives and imposed consequences need to be considered. Pass legislation that fixes the Flores settlement agreement. Allow DHS to hold families in custody during the immigration proceedings. If families are held in custody for their due process and swiftly removed after a deportation order, others will stay home. Legislate and fully fund the required resources to fully implement the historic migrant protection protocol. The Remain in Mexico program delegated Title 42 repatriations ended the surge of 2018 and 19 in the last administration. Pass legislation that allows for UACs to be treated under the law the same way we treat Mexican and Canadian UACs. Reduce the rhetoric that blames U.S. officials for faithfully enforcing the laws that are on the books. Fully fund Border Security Improvement Plan designed to provide the necessary personnel, technology, and infrastructure to substantially meet the expectations of the American public for a secure border. Pass legislation that prohibits state and local jurisdictions from failing to cooperate in immigration enforcement. Fully staff and fund ICE and CBP. Additional staffing and funding is also required for immigration courts, attorneys, and judges. If we believe immigration is a benefit for our country, enforcement and integrity of the immigration system must be funded. I appreciate the opportunity to inform this Congress and stand ready to assist with my expertise as required. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vitiello. I respect your testimony today. I will remind all the witnesses and the members of the committee that the subject of this hearing is the proposed pathway to citizenship for essential workers. Certainly, our overall immigration laws and policy are more comprehensive than that, but the focus of this hearing is essential workers. Our next and final witness is Dr. Holtz-Eakin.
Well, Chairman Padilla, my congratulations to you, and thank you, Ranking Member Cornyn, and members of the subcommittee for the chance to be here today to discuss this important topic. I've been working on immigration reform for the better part of 2 decades, and there is no other single policy issue which can improve the lives of so many Americans. Certainly it has the chance to address the lives of those who are living in shadows, the undocumented, but it can improve the lives of every American by improving the security of our southern border and by adding vitality to our demographic growth and our long-term economic growth, which lifts the boat of every American. If we turn to the focus of the hearing today, the citizenship for essential workers, it seems to me that this is too narrow given the potential for immigration reform. First, there are lots of undocumented populations which could be legalized. The DACA population, for example, comes to mind. And to focus on this one seems like a strange starting point, at least to me, and potentially quite unfair for those DACA individuals who are essential workers for those who are not. It also omits any attempts to improve interior enforcement, which is at odds with the history of legalization bills of this type, and I think is an important issue to consider in thinking about the bill. And its economic focus, the tie to essential workers, strikes me as too narrow. Certainly, I agree with what Dr. Wong said. There are gains, economic gains from legalization. But the real power of immigration reform is in the legal immigration system, reforming our visa program to enhance the vitality of long-term economic growth. We know that historically, immigrants have worked more than native-born Americans. We know that they disproportionately start businesses and are entrepreneurial. 40% of the Fortune 500 was started by an immigrant or their offspring. They disproportionately bring capital and create jobs for other Americans, and they raise the wages of not only themselves, but every native-born American in the process. So having had that kind of success with an immigration system that essentially does not focus on economics, grants less than 10% of visas on the basis of economic criteria, it seems to me that to reform that system so that it more rewards the vitality of the American economy and addresses the demographic problems that we face. We have sub-replacement fertility in the native-born population, and without immigration, we'll actually shrink as a nation, both in population, economic size, and our ability to project our values around the globe. This is an opportunity of first order for this committee and for the Congress. So in thinking about the economic potential of immigration reform, I think it goes well beyond essential workers, and I would urge the committee to look there for better ways to improve our visa system. Last thing I'd say on this bill, and then I'll be happy to answer your questions, is that the definition of essential worker seems incredibly broad. It seems it encompasses nearly 80% of the labor force. And because the protections also apply and the expedited path to citizenship applies to household members, this transforms the bill from really a targeted legalization to a broad-based legalization. It seems to me that if that is the intent, then the committee and the Congress should step back, ask about how legalization fits in with the other priorities facing the country on the immigration front, and proceed down that path, and not with this bill. But I thank you for the chance to talk today about these issues. They're certainly important issues, and I'm happy the committee has taken them up.
Thank you, Doctor, and thank you to all our witnesses. Now we'll move on to questions from the committee. And I'll begin with a question for Dr. Wong. One aspect of the immigration reform debate that is often lost is that many immigrant essential workers have been in the United States for years. Again, this is a very different population than those who have recently arrived at the southern border seeking asylum. Immigrant essential workers are integrated into our communities and clearly into our workforce. On average, these immigrant essential workers have lived in the United States for 18 years. 1 in 5 of them have lived in the United States for more than 25 years. They pay state and federal taxes, pay rent or a mortgage, they buy goods and services, and many even start new businesses that support other jobs for native-born Americans. And yet their immigration status can hold them back from reaching their full potential and from becoming fully integrated into the American economy. Dr. Wong, what impact would granting immigrant essential workers legal status have on American workers and the United States economy? And how would granting legal status contribute to post-pandemic economic recovery?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. And I should also say it is good to be working with you again. I worked under your leadership in the California Census Complete Count Committee. Yes, undocumented essential workers already make significant economic contributions and have deep roots in American society. And yes, providing them with legal status will not only improve their lives and the lives of their families, but can boost the broader American economy. So undocumented essential workers have a combined $195.2 billion in spending power annually. This doesn't even take into account the wage growth that would likely result from obtaining legal status, which would further increase their spending power. As the National Academies notes in their study of the academic literature on the economic impact of immigration, immigrants drive demand in key sectors such as housing, wherein the purchase of homes have derivative positive benefits across local economies. In my own work, I've found that 1/5 of DACA recipients have purchased their first homes after receiving DACA. Now, this is important because by driving demand for goods and services, their spending power means that essential workers who lack permanent legal status are poised to play a significant role in our post-pandemic economic recovery. And by driving demand for goods and services, this will also help bring back jobs for Americans. Now, on the issue of jobs, the National Academies also concludes that immigration, particularly when immigrants have a college degree or higher, which is increasingly the case as foreign-born naturalized citizens have among the highest levels of education among any subset of American society. Well, this increases the wages and employment of both college and non-college educated native-born persons. Relatedly, immigrants also create jobs. Immigrants have long been more likely to start businesses. Data from the Census Survey of Business Owners also shows that foreign-born persons open about 1/4 of new businesses. Immigrants also innovate and account for about 1/4 of all U.S. patents. According to New American Economy, the 3 million immigrant entrepreneurs in the country employ approximately 8 million American workers. So indeed, their entrepreneurism makes them essential for our long-term growth and our post-pandemic economic recovery. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. My next question is for Ms. Tilus. Many healthcare workers have experienced unimaginable trauma in witnessing the deaths of the patients they're caring for. Often they were unable to provide medical interventions because of a lack of medical supplies, such as ventilators, and some were the last people their patients saw before they died. A recent poll conducted by the Washington Post and the Kaiser Family Foundation found that 64% of healthcare workers reported COVID-19 having a negative impact on their mental health. In addition, undocumented immigrant healthcare workers have had the additional stress of fearing deportation while caring for their patients and serving their communities. Ms. Tillis is someone who put her life on the line for her patients during the COVID-19 pandemic. Can you describe how your mental health was affected during the pandemic?
Thank you, Chairman Padilla. Padilla, sorry. So the pandemic had definitely affected my mental health, to say the least. When the pandemic initially started last year, I was working at a nursing home, and our patients were dying by great numbers. There was fear of not knowing what's going to happen. Are we going to contract COVID, and what are we going to do for our patients that depended on us for help? Many times we had to hold their hands while family members couldn't come to see them because of our isolation regulations, knowing that was their last breath. So that was difficult at times. Wearing protective gear for long hours, we were, I could say, obligated to work overtime because of a lack in staffing. So for 16 hours, depending, I had to wear just the full gear with limited break time. That was another added stress. And the fear of bringing the virus home, which eventually happened because we are dealing with just infected people every day. And there was no thinking, should I work or should I not work? My obligation was I need to work. I need to do it for myself. And this was what I knew how to do, save and help patients. Added to that, I had the constant fear of my documentation. I am not a fully legal resident. I have a temporary status that can end anytime. And I've had to, just expect every yearly, is it going to be renewed? What if it's not renewed? What's going to happen to me? That only compounded to the fear that I had experienced throughout the pandemic, and definitely has left me sometimes with nights where, it wasn't a great sleep.
Yeah, and on that point, Ms. Tillis, just on that point, and I'm over time here, so just briefly, what would it mean to you to have a pathway to permanent residency and a pathway to citizenship? What would that mean to you?
It would be a dream come true. I don't think I have the words enough to describe what that would feel like. For years, I've lived in the darkness. Being undocumented was like being having a black hole over my head. It brought fear, shame, and just disappointment overall. to be able to call myself a U.S. citizen, a legal resident, I wouldn't have the words to describe it. It would be having hope for a brighter future, going back to school, getting my doctorate that I've so long wanted to do. It would be a definition of just a dream come true, to answer the question.
Thank you very, very much. Senator Cornyn.
I don't disagree that essential workers have already made a contribution to our economy and to our public health. That's pretty clear. The numbers of people affected with the pathway to citizenship under this bill, I've heard the estimate roughly 5 million new American citizens. What's not clear to me is what about the rest of people who've been here for a long time now? Is there some reason to distinguish between these workers and other people who've contributed to our economy during the time they've been here? And of course, because of the way immigration works, once a family member becomes a legal immigrant, they can then sponsor other family members. So this strikes me as just as frankly discriminating against others who would benefit from a similar remedy, but also really just another way to establish a pathway to citizenship for everyone who is here in the United States out of status or who either overstayed their visa or came into the country illegally. Mr. Vitiello, sometimes the Border Patrol and ICE and other immigration officials talk about push and pull factors when it comes to immigration. The push factors is, I think we can all identify with where whether poverty or violence or just simply wanting a better lot in life. But the pull factors, which are the policies of the host government, in this case, the U.S. government, what is it that has established such a powerful pull factor about the current policies of the United States government at the border?
Well, this surge, like the others, has been caused by a lack of consequence. So on January 21st, we ended the Title 42 repatriations for children who come alone. There was also a policy statement put out, and now a priorities list put out by ICE that says if you're not a convicted felon, a threat to public safety, or another category that's something that just came into the country, we said that you're not going to be on the radar for ICE in the interior, and they did the same sort of thing on the removal process. And so people realize that if they get to the border and they either get away from the Border Patrol in the border environment, or they're apprehended and processed and then released, that encourages other people to take that dangerous journey. And so that's the situation that we're in now. Many people are sending their children to the border, and then on the other side of that, you have the policy statement that we're going to provide amnesty for the apparently 11 million or more people that are here undocumented, a pathway for the DACA recipients, and having these benefits and having these incentives drives more traffic to the border. It's always been that way. They start because of the lack of consequences, and they're ended like in 2005 with an imposition of consequences, like in 2014, family residential centers, so people could go through the due process while in custody. In 2019, it was ended with the Remain in Mexico program. And so you eliminate those incentives, people still have a due process procedure, but then they're removed and sent home, and that forces others to consider not to take that journey because their ultimate success is to be in the country.
In your experience as head of the, I believe, Rio Grande Valley Border Patrol sector, as one of your many jobs you've held, I think where you and I first met, is the flooding of the border with unaccompanied children part of a conscious strategy by the drug smugglers and cartels in order to divert the attention of Border Patrol from the border and their law enforcement duties, and thus to allow an opening through which illegal drugs can be smuggled into the United States?
Yeah, that's important. The pipeline is controlled by criminal cartels. The pass through to the border is controlled by the plaza leaders, the people who are paid or part of these criminal cartels. And so anybody passing through the pipeline, anybody approaching the border in northern Mexico has to pay a tax on top of what they're paying the smugglers. The smugglers have to pay a fee to operate. And when the Border Patrol and CBP officers are distracted by caring for large families, large family units, and young children alone, they're distracted from being able to patrol the border, and the cartels are going to take advantage of every situation that they find themselves in, right? The taxes and the fees that smugglers charge, and then knowing that the report said that 40% of the Border Patrol was, when they were overwhelmed and so many kids in custody, when 40% of them are working on that problem, that's 40% less patrol, that's 40% less of sensor response, that's 40% less of presence on the border to seize drugs, to prevent smuggling events, to rescue human traffickers, people that are being trafficked. So yeah, it is something that the cartels have taken advantage of and will continue to.
Thank you. My time's expired.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. And just want to acknowledge something that you commented on, as well as Dr. Holtz-Eakin, and that is the narrow focus of either the hearing today or the actual bill itself. So I'll turn your attention to the U.S. Citizenship Act, which is the actual much more comprehensive, inclusive legislative proposal that we certainly join you to invite you to join us in that effort. I turn now to Senator Durbin for questions, and he'll be followed by Senator Tilus.
Thank you, Chairman Padilla. This hearing is really bringing together so many issues. It is a reminder you can't sit down in the Immigration Subcommittee and not realize that our immigration system is broken. And in so many ways, it needs to be repaired. You hear from Senator Cornyn and Mr. Vitiello and others about what's happening at the southern border. I would be happy to join you to acknowledge that what's happening there is a product of desperation by these families in these mainly three countries, and a product of exploitation. I don't doubt that for a second. I still cannot imagine a circumstance where I would take my 2-year-old granddaughter and hand her over to someone I don't know who asked for $6,000 to transport her 800 miles and to push her across the border into the arms of one of the uniformed officials. I cannot imagine it. I just can't picture it. But in desperation, people are doing that. And they're being exploited in the process, there's no question. Dr. Holtz-Eakin, I know that you are a minority witness, so they say, Republican-sponsored witness, but I listened carefully to your testimony. And what I hear from you is the suggestion that is so important that we bring home in this hearing, that our economy is not a static economy. It isn't as if there's a fixed number of jobs and we have to fight for them, and that someone who is foreign-born may take away a job from someone who's American-born. What I hear you saying, and others, and I happen to believe, is that it's a dynamic economy. And with a workforce that is well-motivated and well-compensated, and businesses that emerge from that experience, that the economy grows exponentially rather than a static situation. Could you comment?
Well, I think you heard me correctly, and I'm glad to hear that. This is a huge opportunity from the perspective of economic policy. I will emphasize again that the native-born population has sub-replacement facility, which is a fancy way of saying they have so few babies that in the absence of immigration, the United States shrinks. It shrinks in population, it shrinks in economic size and vitality, and it diminishes the opportunities of our future generations. The flip side of that is that our immigration choices can dictate the future of our population, the skills and size of our labor force, and thus the dynamism of the U.S. economy. We have successfully absorbed native-born and immigrants for centuries. We've created jobs and had a steadily rising standard of living. There's no reason why we can't do that in the future and do it even better than we are at the present.
And I've had debates over and over again, primarily with Senator Graham, about this skilled-based immigration. And I think back to my family circumstances. I am sure that when my grandfather came to this country with my mother, he had limited skills, but he had a strong back and he was determined to work. He made a living. And I hear the story over and over of Senator Padilla's family, some basic jobs. they made a living and made a family and made a future in America. I like the approach that you're taking, skill-based points, but you have this temporary visa system that you proposed, which says that individuals who don't have the skills, marketable skills right then and there, because of lower educational levels, would still be eligible for admission through a temporary worker program. And then, if they work continuously for 6 years, would be eligible for a permanent visa program. Describe that if I've misrepresented it in any way.
Correct. And there is one branch of this, which is a point system, and that's just like reading resumes. You look at it and you say, oh, this person has a PhD, speaks English, has some experience. Wow, great hire, great person to have in the United States. But we all know people whose resumes aren't polished and shiny. They maybe didn't finish high school, got off to a rocky start in the labor force, but eventually turned out to be the best employee you ever met. It could really get things done and helped enormously. This second track is intended to identify those people in the immigrant population. They come, they find an employer who wants to employ them. They are successfully employed for one visa, 3 years, get it renewed, do another 3 years. At that point, they have proven their value in the way that America measures value, success in the market. And if they are valuable, we would like to give them an opportunity to be here permanently, and we put them in line with those from the point system.
I thank you for that. I just want to close by saying that I heard one of your comments, why are you limiting it to so-called essential workers? And as Senator Padilla has said, and I will say too, we would gladly expand the category of eligible people. But we thought that there was a compelling argument, Senator Padilla thought, and I co-sponsored, a compelling argument to be made for those who have proven their worth and proven their dedication to American during the pandemic, to give them a chance to have this opportunity. Thanks to all the witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. Next for questions is Senator Blackburn, if she's available virtually. Senator Blackburn, are you there? Senator Blackburn.
Okay. Hi.
There we go. We can hear you now.
Let's see. Let me get my volume up here.
Oh, we can hear you well.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had multiple committees going on today. But thank you. Let's see. I want to come to Mr. Vitiello first, if I may, with my question. We have the migrant protection protocols that the president put into place, that President Trump had put into place, seemed to be doing a good job of helping to secure things at the southern border and closing those catch and release loopholes. We found that we had a more secure border. What I'd like to ask you is what you saw on the border as the difference that those migrant protection protocols made, and the difference that we saw in 2019 and 2020 as to what we are seeing today at the southern border.
So the protocols were important in a number of ways. It does, like you said, close the loophole in the immigration framework. It allows people to petition to go to immigration court and have an asylum hearing. But instead of waiting in the United States with a notice to appear, we made an agreement with Mexico so that the people could wait in Mexico to have those hearings. And so what that does is it kind of closes the loop. It says to people, look, if you're going to make this dangerous journey only to be stopped at the border and left in Mexico to wait, then you're not going to send for family members. You're not going to send for cousins, aunts, and uncles. You're not going to encourage other people to make that trek, which is very dangerous. And they're at great risk in that pipeline. And so the migrant protection protocols close the loop, if you will. And also, there was also pressure put on Mexico in an effective way in which they deployed on their southern border about 25,000 National Guard troops to help protect their border environment with Guatemala. And then they put, first time I'd ever seen it in my career, they put troops near our border on the northern border to make sure that the smugglers didn't mass these large groups right at the immediate border, send them across to distract the Border Patrol, like Senator Cornyn talked about. That way the cartels would take advantage of numbers of agents being held to help protect these hundreds of people, and while the cartels run wild everywhere else in the border. And so it wasn't just the agreement, which is historic as it was, but the active response by Mexico to help fully implement it.
I have to tell you, being on the border in Arizona and seeing firsthand the sophistication of the cartels, and I've been going to the border now for over a decade, and it seems like the most challenging situation that I have ever seen at the border because the cartels are sophisticated. They have surveillance that they are running 24/7. They are surveilling our law enforcement officers and our local law enforcement. This just creates so much pressure on doing their job. And then as you look at the fentanyl and the meth that the cartels are pushing into this country over the areas where they're circumventing our border patrol, and they're working around them. So I think this really creates an added pressure for our law enforcement, and we have turned those migrant protection protocols into legislation that we are going to move forward to. I want to ask you about one more issue, and that is the illegal immigrants that are in our country because they overstay their visas. And we have looked at this issue and discussed it for years, that there need to be reforms to tighten this up so that once individuals have reached the end of the time that they can stay here in this country, that they exit the country. So what is your advice on reforms that need to be done to address this issue of overstaying visas?
Well, there's probably stuff to do on the legislative side as it relates to penalties for people who overstay. I think that's addressed in this legislation we're talking about today. But CBP has, since the 9/11 Commission report, been working on figuring out how to recognize people who come to the United States on a visa, whether they left or not. It was very difficult to do. But the technology and the aspiration to get it done has improved. And so CBP now has in airports, international airports all over the country, a biometric exit verification. So when someone comes through on a visa and they exit as they're supposed to, then that record gets filed into the system and everybody knows, the government knows that that person didn't overstay their visa. But then there's lots of people who are coming across the land borders and that system is not yet in place. And so there's still some work to be done, if you will, in verifying exits at the land border. But that's the kind of thing that needs to be done to secure and make sure that those visas are used as they're designed, right? So this person comes and applied for a visa. That's a contract with the United States to come in and comply with terms. And then they're also screened at the border and they affirm that they're going to use that visa for its intention. But then they go back on their word, if you will, and they have two bites at the apple, if you will, to tell the government that they could be trustworthy under that scenario. And so verifying exit and maybe additional penalties for people who find themselves in that situation.
Well, thank you for that insight. And this is an issue we're going to work on, just as with turning the migrant protection protocols into legislation and pushing for that passage. We had a safer, more secure border and a better, safer work environment for our Border Patrol and our ICE officers when we had those in place. So thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Before calling on Senator Hirono, who will join us virtually, I just want to remind us yet again, all the witnesses, all the members of the committee, of the focus and subject of today's hearing, proposed pathway to citizenship for essential workers, number one, and number two, just to correct the record on the MPP H-1B program. The Remain in Mexico policy was undoubtedly inhumane. People who came to the border to legally apply for asylum were turned away and asked to return at a later date without any due process protections. As of February of this year, there were more than 1,500 reported cases of murder, rape, torture, kidnapping, and other violent assault against asylum seekers and migrants forced to return to Mexico. That's why the Biden administration is making sure that people are processed in a humane way and in accordance with the law. Senator Hirono is next, and she joins us virtually.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Our immigration system has long been broken, and I have watched President Trump decimate it even further over the last 4 years. And he separated families, gutted the asylum system, wasted money on his vanity wall, took power away from immigration judges, defunded critical programs meant to help Northern Triangle countries, and implemented policy changes whose only goal was to keep people out of this country, and not very successfully at that either. What's happening on the southern border did not start with the Biden administration, but the Biden administration is fixing it. And certainly this is not going to happen overnight. So this administration has streamlined the processing of unaccompanied children, are cracking down on smuggling operations, and Vice President Harris is looking toward durable solutions that will stabilize the region and implement long-term policies that address the root causes of migration. Today, we can do our part and consider proposals such as citizenship for essential workers that rebuilds our immigration system into one that is fair and efficient, and should I say, humane. I want to thank Chairman Padilla for holding this hearing and all of the witnesses who are testifying today. Ms. Tilus, am I pronouncing your name? Is it Titus?
Sorry, Tilus.
Tilus. Oh, Tilus, I'm sorry. So you have shared with us your experience. Can you tell us how your life would change if you became a U.S. citizen?
Thank you very much, Senator. So if I became a U.S. citizen, it would definitely make a great difference in my life. Number one, it would just relieve the constant fear I have of being deported or not having a worker's permit, say, for the next year. It would give me the freedom that I have so long wanted to be a legal person in this country, so I can call myself a legal person. It would make a difference for my family. It would give them peace of mind. I would have security with my current job position, because my biggest fear is if I lose my worker's permit, then I can't continue to work, and I wouldn't know what else to do. This has been pretty much just my life from the moment I got here. I wanted to be a nurse, it would, so that would be the major thing. It would give you just the peace of mind to know that I'm safe, that I don't have to worry about the fear of going back to Haiti. And every day you hear the news, the stories are just getting worse and worse with instability and political turmoil. I couldn't imagine being asked to go back to start over after 20 years. I have lived in the United States for longer than I have lived in Haiti. In a way, I can say that this is my home. I wouldn't know what else to do.
And wouldn't you say, Ms. Tilus, that your story, your fear, your anxiety, that those are all experiences being felt by the millions and millions of people who are here, either undocumented or who have a temporary protected status. So you speak, do you consider yourself speaking for all those people who just want to have a chance at citizenship in our country?
I would say yes. And I hope that they know that I'm speaking not just for myself, for anyone with, an undocumented, especially someone who was working during the pandemic to just help this country, that, they are heard, they are valued, and that, we are fighting for a permanent legalization.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For Dr. Wong, thank you very much. For Dr. Wong and Mr. Goldstein, you have laid out how much undocumented immigrants in our country provide in terms of taxes, and to the billions. What would happen to healthcare, agriculture, and the food supply sectors if these people, if they did not have immigrant workers doing these jobs, if the millions of undocumented people in our country were not doing these jobs, what would happen? Who would do these jobs? What would happen to our economy? Dr. Wong, Mr. Goldstein, very briefly.
Perhaps I'll go ahead, Tom.
Oh no, I was going to say I already talked, so I think it's your turn up.
Okay, so thank you for the question, Senator. At least one half the nation's 2.4 million farm workers are undocumented immigrants. So it doesn't take a labor economist, and I'm not an economist, to conclude that the deportation of any significant number of undocumented immigrants on farms and ranches would cause our agricultural system to collapse. Deportation. Large numbers of farm workers are necessary to produce a lot of our food, vegetable, fruits, milk, chicken, fish, and these jobs take skills and experience. And let me just finish by saying that it's not just about the quantity of food, it's about the quality. Farm workers are trained to ensure that the foodborne illnesses do not cause us disease and illness.
Thank you. We could go on, but thank you all for providing the kind of information that we needed to make informed and humane decisions. Thank you. Aloha.
Thank you. Next, we have Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations on the chairman's gavel. The bill that we're discussing in this hearing today is, I believe, a very dangerous bill. It is a radical bill that would grant amnesty to millions of people here illegally with a broad swath that is both wrong, immoral, and profoundly unfair. It's unfair to millions of Americans, low-income Americans, Americans who may be out of work, Americans who may be in difficult jobs. The open border policies of Democrats is driving down wages of millions of Americans. The African American community, this bill is terrible for the African American community. It lowers wages in the African American community. The Hispanic community, this bill is terrible for the Hispanic community, for legal immigrants. I represent the state of Texas, 29 million Texans. There is a right way to come to this country. We are a nation of immigrants. My father came as an immigrant from Cuba in 1957. The right way to come is to come legally, to wait in line, to follow the law. This bill drives down wages of millions of legal immigrants. And this bill is also profoundly unfair to illegal immigrants. That may seem counterintuitive, but the crisis that is playing out on our southern border is the direct result of bills like this and the radical policies of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Just over a month ago, Senator Cornyn and I took 19 senators down to the southern border, to the Rio Grande Valley. Representing the state of Texas, I've been to the southern border many, many, many times. The situation there today is worse than I have ever seen it. It is an absolute crisis. It is a humanitarian crisis. It is a public health crisis. It is a national security crisis. In the month of April, over 178,000 people came to this country illegally. The 19 senators we brought down there went to the Donna tent facility, a gigantic tent city built to accommodate 1,000 people. With COVID restrictions, its capacity was 250 people. The day we were there, over 4,200 people were packed in there. That's 1,700% its safe capacity. We saw one after the other, the Biden cages. For 4 years, the press and Democrats talked incessantly about kids in cages. What they never told you is Barack Obama built those cages, and Joe Biden is building more of the cages, and they're more full than before. In the Biden cages, we saw little boys and little girls packed in next to each other, not 6 feet apart, as you would want in a pandemic, not 3 feet apart. They weren't even 3 inches apart. They're lying on the floor in the cages, side by side, no beds, no cots, no mats, on the floor, wrapped in reflective emergency blankets. And the Biden administration implemented a press blackout. ABC News wanted to embed with the 19 senators. Fox News wanted to embed with the 19 senators. And the Biden administration said, no, we cannot allow reporters to see what's happening. Why? And this is where the absurdity came through. Why? Because of COVID. Never mind the 4,200 people packed in those facilities and a 10% COVID positivity rate. Never mind that. One cameraman from ABC News was an unacceptable risk of COVID. So what happened, the 19 senators, we pulled out our cell phones and we took photographs and videos and put them out. By the way, the Trump administration allowed the press in. The Obama administration allowed the press in. So did Bush, so did Clinton. It is only Joe Biden that is desperately counting on the press hiding the crisis that is playing out. We put out those videos and pictures which started to have attention to the crisis. These children who are being smuggled in by cartels, many of them are being physically abused, being sexually abused, and it's happening more and more and more, and it is the promise of amnesty. We're told by advocates of bills like this that amnesty is humane. It is not humane when you have this year over 2 million people projected to come here illegally, being horribly mistreated by cartel members, being abused. That is the opposite of compassion. It is the opposite of humanity. You want a humane policy, enforce the law. Last year, we had the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years because the Remain in Mexico policy works. Today, we have the highest rate in 20 years. Enforce the law and welcome legal immigrants. That's the right way to come.
As we await the next senator to join us, just following up on some of the issues that have been raised repeatedly during this hearing, Dr. Wong, you've heard from some members the argument that providing permanent protections for undocumented immigrants would increase migration and have an adverse impact on jobs or wages for citizens as well as legal permanent residents, although it seems that research indicates otherwise. So can you share what is or what isn't consistent with what you have found in your own research, and can you elaborate on this point?
Yes, thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. So providing a pathway to citizenship for immigrant essential workers who lack permanent legal status will not create a magnet for more undocumented immigration, despite the concerns addressed thus far in the hearing. For example, research has shown that IRCA, the last large-scale legalization in 1986, did not change long-term patterns of undocumented immigration to the U.S., and that undocumented immigration actually decreased in the years immediately following IRCA in 1986, given there were more legal avenues then for individuals to enter the country and gain legal status. If we fast forward to more recent debates over comprehensive immigration reform, research shows that knowledge of the passage of the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Act of 2006 during that push for a path to citizenship did not increase the intent to migrate among prospective undocumented Mexican immigrants who were surveyed in traditional sending communities in Mexico. Now, this is because the institutional design of legalization programs tend to have two temporal dimensions. There's a concurrent dimension that typically requires that undocumented immigrants be present in the US before the start of any legalization program. For example, although it became law in 1986, an undocumented immigrant needed to be in the US prior to January 1st, 1982, in order to be eligible for legalization under IRCA. Whereas the concurrent dimension affects undocumented immigrants currently in the US, the prospective dimension affects future flows, more specifically making all persons ineligible for legalization after the date of enactment is designed to deter persons from coming to the US because of any particular legalization program. Even more recently, research has shown that DACA has not had a magnet effect either in general or on the arrival of unaccompanied asylum-seeking minors to the US. I should also note that I have looked at the effect of the zero tolerance policy, of expanded family separation under the Obama administration, and even the Flores Settlement Agreement on the arrivals of unaccompanied minors as well as family units. And there is no statistically significant relationship that shows a deterrent effect. And finally, with respect to TPS, research has shown that looking at Northern Triangle countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, there is no relationship between the granting of TPS to those individuals, those country designations, and increased apprehensions of undocumented nationals from El Salvador, Guatemala, or Honduras. Altogether, there is an academic literature that says that legalization programs do not further incentivize undocumented immigration. They do the opposite because they create more legal pathways for entry. And to the question about deterrence as being a part of this conversation, there's also a large literature that says that deterrence policies do not deter, but in fact either delay or simply displaces unauthorized entry routes. When unauthorized entry routes are displaced, that actually increases migrant deaths because migrants are forced to, instead of going to San Diego or El Centro, they go immediately east to the Yuma Desert. And when we think about increase in migrant death, we're talking about the humanitarian toll for individuals who want to avoid that humanitarian toll and want to come to the US. Then we see an increase in the costs that human smugglers charge. But when individuals pay that cost, that increases their likelihood of successful entry into the United States because that multi-billion-dollar smuggling business means that individuals know how to get folks in. That's why they're getting paid. But to Senator Cruz's point about the horrific conditions that undocumented immigrants face when they are in the hands of unscrupulous smugglers, that is a question that is separate altogether from the question of legal status for undocumented immigrants. Now, the question about whether or not providing legal status would further incentivize undocumented immigration, I think the academic literature is clear. The answer is no.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. Next for questions, joining us virtually is Senator Booker. And you'll also preside virtually for the time being while I go Senator Cornyn to cast my vote on the floor. I'll be back in a few. Senator Booker.
And I'm going to jump right in back with some questions for Dr. Wong. At the onset of the pandemic, the previous administration approved nearly 20 requests from meatpacking plants to exceed regulatory limits on line speeds. It's a move that seriously endangered those workers. Many of these same meatpacking plants acted as massive infection hotspots that were responsible for numerous outbreaks in the communities in which they were all across the country, infecting tens of thousands of workers and tragically killing hundreds. Unfortunately, we know the majority of these workers are from immigrant communities and communities of color. And so, Dr. Wong, can you speak to the need for providing stronger workplace safety protections for essential workers, such as meatpacking workers during things like the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond?
Thank you for that question, Senator Booker. There is a recent study jointly done with the CDC that focuses on facilities like meatpacking facilities. And the question that was asked in that study was who was being affected, whether it be COVID infections or death. And the data were stark. Disproportionately, we saw Hispanic and Latinx workers attracting COVID as a result of the working conditions. Put it otherwise, they were attracting COVID by keeping us fed. And so when we think about the adjustment from being undocumented to having legal status, we, in the academic literature, talk about returns to capital. That's just a fancy way of saying that individuals, when they have legal status, can better utilize the skills that they have. That can be moving from meatpacking to a different industry altogether, but that can also mean exercising rights. And so the ability to go from undocumented to having legal status means also the ability to exercise workplace protection rights, so that if there are individuals, employers in particular, who are doing unscrupulous things, then workers then have the ability to say something, to report it, to push back without fear of retribution, for example, with respect to immigration-related consequences. And so when we talk about the transition from being undocumented to having some kind of legal status, we have spent much oxygen to talk about the economic impact, the positive economic impact that would have for all Americans. But in this particular question, it's important to draw attention to how individuals can better exercise their rights because they have that legal protection of not being undocumented and having some kind of legal status at their back.
These issues clearly are overlapping, and I want to turn to Ms. Tilus. Today, I'm really proud to be introducing the HEAL Act, H-E-A-L, for immigrant families, which will expand access to health coverage by reducing unfair, unjust barriers that currently exist for many immigrant communities. Ms. Tilus, have there been times that you or people you know were denied access to health coverage because of their immigration status? And maybe you can speak briefly about how barriers to coverage impact not just the health and well-being of the immigrant we're discussing, but really threaten entire immigrant communities, as well as the larger, as we know from COVID, the larger American community as well. Could you discuss perhaps that?
Yes, thank you, Senator. Yes, so in the county area where I'm living, I live in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. I have witnessed at the community health center, our patients, whether they are from Hispanic background or say a Haitian background, I have witnessed the fear that patients have when they come in the clinic that if they come in, they'll be deported or that we're going to report them to ISIS. Because of that, they don't always keep up their appointments. They don't always come in for follow-ups, whether it's diabetes or hypertension. The other thing as well, it's monetary ability. Some of them do not have money to pay for visits. They are not insured. And as a result, they can't afford their medications, for example, or just like lab works that need to be done. So that has impacted the way, we serve our immigrant population and the way they receive healthcare. So that has had a lot of problem with the way they access healthcare. To answer the other part of the question, another way I've seen immigrants not receive the appropriate care, it's during the pandemic. Some patients, when they are sick, for example, they will call and they are afraid again, just to seek help. And they need to go to the hospital. Some people are still afraid to go, afraid that they will be arrested. Same thing with vaccination. We are doing just great vaccination promotion in the state. People are still afraid, are they gonna get in trouble for getting the vaccine if they're not documented? So we have seen that on numerous counts. Sometimes we are able to help. It depends on their situation. Sometimes we have like a discounted price for visits. And unfortunately, sometimes we don't always give them the support. But it has been a major problem with health coverage for our population. I hope that answered the question.
No, you did. And the urgency of, in a pandemic, people who are vulnerable to disease, to the virus anywhere, are a threat to people's health everywhere. And to somehow create these lines where certain people have access and others don't, that are living in a community or neighborhood, is just dangerous. And that's one of the reasons why I introduced this legislation. I have been instructed, I'm over time now, and I've been instructed by Chairman Padilla that I should recess because there's a vote going on right now, which I'm going to have to run and do. But I've asked to recess this hearing, but to ask everybody that is online to remain online, as I will myself, so that we can just pick up when senators get back from their voting. Senator Padilla is probably already voted, maybe on his way back to the hearing room by now. So I would just ask, tread upon the patience of all of our witnesses the whole panel has been giving such valuable insights. And I would ask for you to remain online, put yourself on mute, give a shout out to the family members who've stayed out of camera lane. If you have pets, maybe you can take them off the leash and pet them for a little while, and then restrain them again. Whatever you've had to do to keep your home testifying sacrosanct. You can just take a little breather now, maybe turn off your camera, but stay online. And I just, again, appreciate everybody. These issues are so urgent and go to the core of our country's values. So thank you, everybody. And I don't know if,
Mr. Chairman,
yes, sir.
can I just ask, do you need to leave to go vote?
Yeah, that's why I was asked to recess it, because I've got to go vote now as well, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, I was instructed. I'm just doing what I'm told, which is the secret to being a great senator, sir. All right. With Senator Cornyn has so much more seniority than me that whenever he engages with me, I have to hold my breath to make sure that I'm not missing something. But
The only difference between you and me is I've already voted.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate your deference to the wishes of the chairman Padilla, and I'm gonna go run and vote now. So thank you, everybody.
Welcome back to a hearing of the Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration, Naturalization, and Border Safety. Thank you for your patience during a brief recess. A lot of work happening here in the Capitol today. As we continue, let me turn to Senator Cornyn for a second round of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And actually, before you start, I'm sorry, just want to confirm with our tech folks that our witnesses are back with us, virtually, of course, but with us. Yes, got the thumbs up. Senator Cornyn.
Thank you. Dr. Wong, according to your testimony, undocumented immigrants pay about $47 billion in taxes, federal taxes, annually. In 2013, the immigration reform package at that time would have required undocumented immigrants who did not pay taxes to satisfy their federal tax liability before they could receive legal status. The Citizenship for Essential Workers Act includes no such provision. Do you consider this an oversight? Should this bill be amended to require all undocumented immigrants to satisfy their federal tax liability before they get legal status? Or if not, why should these folks be exempted?
Thank you for the question, Senator Cornyn. I think that for past efforts at comprehensive immigration reform, there has been this idea of earned legalization, an earned pathway to citizenship. And as part of the conversation today, I think we have made the point that essential workers, whether they be in healthcare or agriculture, have indeed earned a pathway to citizenship. Now, the specific contours of that, I think I will leave for lawmakers to decide. But to the extent that there are individuals who are in the workforce and are contributing, not just in their labor, but also in taxes, while performing essential work, then I think they have more than earned a pathway to citizenship. But again, the details of what that pathway looks like, I think is for lawmakers to decide.
Would you support a scenario where these undocumented immigrants did not pay taxes and achieve legal status while American citizens were required to pay taxes?
I appreciate the question, Senator Cornyn, but I think that's an incomplete hypothetical. When we're imagining...
I get to make the hypotheticals, not you.
Okay.
You can answer it or not.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, sir. Should undocumented immigrants not have to pay taxes in order to achieve legal status while American citizens do have to pay taxes?
The undocumented essential workers that we are talking about today are in the workforce and thus are already paying taxes and thus, in my opinion, have earned a pathway to citizenship.
Dr. Holtz-Eakin, comprehensive immigration bills in the past have always included what is sometimes called the back of the line rule. Under the back of the line rule, or maybe I should say under that tradition, so to speak, undocumented immigrants would not be eligible to receive lawful permanent resident status until the immigrant visa backlogs are cleared. Do you believe that tradition or that rule, so to speak, is important, and would you be concerned about the fact that the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act abandons that approach?
I am concerned that there is no such provision in the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act. That's a matter of fairness as much as anything else. It also combines with the absence of internal enforcement reforms and effective approaches at the border to, in my view, provide some genuine incentives for cross-border migration for purposes of getting a frontline job in the hopes that Congress does this again. And since there are no new pathways for legal immigration created in this bill, there's a real serious, I think, threat of bad economic incentives.
Dr. Holtz-Eakin, many of the people we're talking about here today are already working in the United States. The premise here is they're essential workers and already working, and so they should be rewarded with lawful permanent resident status or legalization. In your opinion, would this bill significantly address American companies' labor needs, Or would targeted reform to our guest worker and employment-based immigration program promote economic recovery more effectively?
This bill would create no new labor supply in the United States at all, and so would not address any labor needs that are showing up as shortages at the moment. So it would reward with citizenship some people who are not working, namely the family members of the exceedingly broad swath of workers who have been labeled essential workers in this bill. As I said in my written testimony, I think having nearly 80% of workers classified as essential is at odds with the term, and I think this has morphed into a de facto broad legalization. You can have a legalization bill. The U.S. Citizenship Act is such a thing, but legalization alone is not an answer to the multiple problems that face us on the immigration front.
If the chair will indulge me, I have one last question. Mr. Vitiello, under current law, a migrant convicted of or one who admits their guilt of a crime involving moral turpitude or other violation of law or regulation relating to controlled substances is inadmissible into the United States. Under this proposed legislation, aliens who admit to these crimes but are not convicted would no longer be inadmissible. In other words, you would not be able to prevent them from becoming American citizens. What effect would this change in the law have on DHS's ability to exclude criminal aliens and protect public safety?
Well, it puts at risk border communities, immigrant communities, where these people will end up if they're allowed into the country under whatever circumstance. And so, negating past behavior, criminal activity is never good for the society at large. And the recidivism rate in all categories is quite high. So people who have committed felonies previously go on to recommit. And so you're importing folks who would otherwise be excluded from the country because of their past behavior. And so consequences matter. When people, young and old, make mistakes, they need to learn from them, and consequences as it relates to excludability or deportation is one of those factors that needs to be considered. You don't want to incent people who are already involved in criminal activity to come into the United States.
Thank you. My time has expired. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Cornyn. Let me begin with the first of what I believe are the final two questions for today's hearing. This one for Mr. Goldstein. For many Americans, the pandemic was the first time that they were really forced to think about where food comes from. There was a lot of concern that we would face food shortages or supply chain challenges. But even as toilet paper and hand sanitizer quickly disappeared from the shelves, our grocery stores were quickly restocked. And that was because farm workers continued showing up to work each and every day to feed the country. They risked, and many lost their lives for the rest of us. But even when the pandemic ends, so many farm workers will be at risk of deportation. My question is this, Mr. Goldstein: what would happen to our nation's food supply if undocumented farm workers were deported?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. As I mentioned earlier, we depend on immigrants to produce our food in this country, and a majority of those immigrants are undocumented immigrants. And among the 2.4 million, at least half are undocumented. We are, if any significant number of them were to be deported, there would be a catastrophe. Employers often tell us that we work with a number of agricultural employers, businesses. They tell us that labor is in short supply. They need the workers coming to them and performing that work. And it's not just about producing a quantity of food. These workers are trained how to produce, how to cultivate crops in a way and treat animals in a way that's going to be profitable and safe. It cannot be easily replaced. And we're not replacing them with with robots anytime soon. We need to end this whole history of a wink and a nod where agricultural employers are allowed to hire hundreds of thousands of undocumented immigrants and take advantage of the fact that they are in a vulnerable position, and we need to give them immigration status.
Thank you very much. I believe your response in summary is that, yes, farm workers are indeed skilled labor. Final question for Dr. Wong. You mentioned in your testimony that over 500,000 DACA and TPS holders are frontline essential workers. In fact, 29,000 DACA recipients are serving as healthcare workers. Nearly 15,000 as teachers, and more than 140,000 are working in food and agricultural industries. We know that any day now, Judge Hennon, a U.S. District Court judge in Texas, will rule on the DACA program that could have a significant impact on not only these essential workers, but the communities that they serve. In addition, several countries such as Haiti, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nepal will lose their TPS designations in October of this year unless they are redesignated. So with this as context, Dr. Wong, can you tell us more about the national impact and potential harms of removing these workers from our country, and how would we be able to move forward with our recovery without them?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, 500,000 DACA and TPS holders are essential workers. DACA and TPS provides individuals with work authorization, so taking their work authorization away would be devastating for our economy. Potentially deporting them will also cause significant harm to American families. So with respect to the economic fallout, we would lose an estimated 29,000 healthcare workers who are DACA recipients, as well as 12,700 who work in healthcare support occupations. We'd also lose 142,100 DACA recipients who are working in food and agricultural industries, as well as 14,900 DACA recipients who are teachers. Add to this the 11,600 healthcare workers who are TPS holders, the 76,100 TPS holders who work in our food supply chain, and the thousands of others who work across the broad range of other essential occupations. Now, states like California would lose over 80,000 essential workers, and Texas would lose just over 50,000 if DACA and TPS were to end. But to make even more vivid why legal status and work authorization are important, myself, along with the Center for American Progress, National Immigration Law Center, and United We Dream, have surveyed DACA recipients annually over the past several years. DACA recipients report that after receiving DACA, 63% moved to a job with a better pay, 53% moved to a job with better working conditions, 53% moved to a job that better fits their education and training, and 55% moved to a job that better fits their long-term career goals. So the ability to begin realizing their full economic potential, which includes over 90% reporting that DACA has allowed them to pursue educational opportunities they previously could not, helps explain the doubling of average hourly wages among DACA recipients, their increased spending power, as well as their increased tax contributions. So ending DACA would undo these economic gains. But beyond the economy, 3 out of every 4 DACA recipients have an immediate family member who is a U.S. citizen. Nearly 3 out of every 10 DACA recipients has a U.S. citizen child. Among those who are married, 6 out of 10 are married to a U.S. citizen. Moreover, the average age that DACA recipients came to the U.S. is 6 years old. So should DACA end and DACA recipients become subject to deportation, we would be tearing apart the families of people who have quite literally known no other country but ours as their home. And just quickly regarding TPS, myself, along with the Center for American Progress and Adhikar, conducted one of the first systematic surveys of Nepali TPS holders. If TPS for Nepal were to end, a full 83% of respondents surveyed agreed or strongly agreed that, quote, if I return to Nepal, I would be concerned about my physical safety for myself and for my family. With respondents who have U.S. citizen children, this increased to 85%. So undoing DACA and TPS would not just undo economic gains, but it would also tear families apart and potentially send individuals back to places where their physical integrity could be threatened.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. Before we conclude this hearing, I will move to enter a number of statements into the record, including statements from Amigos de Guadalupe Center for Justice and Empowerment, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta, Bend the Arc Jewish Action, CASA, Catholic Charities of Santa Clara County, Church World Service, Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, Community Change Action and the Fair Immigration Reform Movement Action, Forward.US, Faith in Action, Faith in New Jersey, Faith in Public Life Action, Grail Family Services, Humane Agenda, Improve the Dream, Latino Community Foundation, Make the Road Connecticut, Nevada, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York, National Employment Law Project, National Immigration Forum, National Partnership for New Americans, Network, One America with Justice for All, Oxfam America, Si Se Puede Collective, Somos Mayfair, the American Friends Services Committee, the Salvador Y Alvarez Institute for Nonviolence, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, Unidos U.S., United Farm and Commercial Workers International Union, Vegilution, Voces Essential Worker Rights Network of Voces de la Frontera, and Voto Latino. Without objection, these statements will be included, and the record will close 1 week from today. And as this hearing concludes, I'd like to thank my fellow subcommittee members, the subcommittee staff, and especially our witnesses for joining us and for your participation today. The testimony that we've heard today speaks to the depth and breadth of immigrants' critical contributions to our economy and throughout our economy. But we know that statistics alone could not give a full picture of all the ways that immigrants are critical to America's strength and recovery. We need to hear the powerful stories of individuals like Ms. Tilus, who have faced down immense challenges and hardships to build their lives here and contribute to our communities. We are fortunate that people like Ms. Tilus call America home. Now, I'm heartened to hear from my Republican colleagues today that they agree with the premise that immigrants are essential to our economy. I hope that we can build on that foundation. But I also heard my Republican colleagues try to argue that this bill is both too narrow and too broad, that we're both doing too much and too little with this legislative proposal. They can't have it both ways. And I hope that we can work together to provide the clarity of what we can do as negotiations continue. We also shouldn't create false narratives and try to drive wedges between different immigrant populations. Neither I nor anyone else has argued that we should help essential immigrant workers and stop there. I want to be clear that this bill is just one piece of a broader solution, and I welcome my Republican colleagues to join us on the comprehensive immigration reform package we have put forth in the U.S. Citizenship Act, and to join us on bills that have been introduced related to Dreamers, farm workers, and TPS holders. These are solutions broadly supported by the American people, and I invite and I urge my Republican colleagues to join us. And with that, thank you again, everybody. This hearing is adjourned.